Thank you, Raj, and thank you all friends at DEF for the opportunity. I think I would be delighted to share some of our experience, our activities in regards to the utilizations of internet and digital media. Was started, I think, in around 2000 when we established Bandung Center for New Media Arts in Bandung in West Java. At that time, our focus is mostly to encourage the development of multidisciplinary artistic practice that are based on the internet and the digital media platform, since the internet and digital media is perhaps during that time is new for everybody, not only for us in Bandung and West Java, but I think in global level. So from there, we work a lot with local community in Bandung, which have relatively strongly embedded to this urban culture with this new and emerging creative practice after the political turmoil that happens in Indonesia back in 1998. So I have to say that the internet is somehow having a very important role in pushing forward the democratic transition in Indonesia, which before 98 we have under military regime, and with the people power and the internet and digital media, I think back at the time during the student movement in 98, in which I was also actively engaged, we use internet to disseminate ideas about democratic society. So actually from there, our interest to use the internet and digital media as a platform to empower people is started to grow. And I think our work with the indigenous community of Kasukuan Ciptagelar was started in around 2013. It was actually under serendipity because at that time we got a commission project led by the Agency for Development in West Java to collect some data and involved in the research for policy making process around ecotourism and creative economy. So we conducting research in around 16 regencies, and Ciptagelar indigenous community is one of the particular area that we are visiting and taking part in our research project. And at that time we are quite surprised because the indigenous community, the Kasepuan Ciptagelar indigenous community is known for its padi culture and cultivation, in which very traditional, but the chief leader is acknowledged. He even established it time. But when we visit the village back in 2013, the internet connectivity is not well established yet, even though there are some telecom providers that is already operating in the area. So starting from 2014, we discussed a lot with the chief leader and also some elders representative about the possibilities in setting up local internet infrastructure. So after that, actually in 2015, the realizations of that ideas is started to crystallize. So we facilitate the multi-stakeholder meeting in 2016, inviting some colleague from the Ministry of Communication, the Ministry of Planning and Development agencies, as well as some friends who are actively engaged with the internet activism like ICT Watch and Relawan TIK. And we formulate some kind of recommendation at that time. And one particular recommendation is to set up a local internet infrastructure in order to enhance the communication platform in the village. But at that time, the option for the affordable technology is not as widely available as today. So together with, actually we also consulting our interest to Ono Purbo, who are also well known as a founding father of community network movement in Indonesia, who are also involved in spectrum liberation movement back in around 2000. At that time, actually, our initial plan is to try out the open BTS technology, but since the technology is quite expensive, not only in terms of money, but also resources, it needs certain technicians and technicalities. So Ono Purbo actually recommend us to use radio frequency, which is more affordable and in terms of technicality is more easy to learn. So from there, step by step, we started to work on the local internet infrastructure since until we met Awinet, who do an experimentation in setting up local internet infrastructure back in 2018. And then after that, together with APC in 2019, we started to expand the local community network project and deploy the local internet infrastructure. We're starting with 5 villages using 5.8 frequency for point-to-point to access the internet gateways, and then using 2.4 gigahertz frequency to connect from the backhaul tower to the end user. And from this 5 village, it expands to 10 village. And now the local internet infrastructure is already reached around 29 villages, with daily user on average is around 900 until 1,000 users. And since we also have an experience where our government trying to facilitate internet connectivity for rural areas, which is basically using public money and some subsidies. But from our experience, to use public monies and subsidies is a bit risky, since when they cut down the public funding, the internet connectivity is somehow are also gone. So from there, we learned that we need to...
Gustav, just a question on that. So what, with all the networks you've deployed, how have you funded them? Where did the money come to do the initial setup?
The startup, the seed funding came from APC back in 2019. So from there, we work together with the local community, trying to draw up the business model together with Awinet. And then in the end, we find out that the best option at the moment is by using the internet voucher. So the user in the village can make some adjustment how long and how much internet connections they need for their daily use. And we are very happy that the business model is somehow running. But we also learned that out of the technicality on the local internet infrastructure, to make sure that the business model is running well, we also need to back up with administration and financial services. So up until now, I think on average every month we can collect money at around $2,000. So we can pay out the bandwidth, we can allocate money for maintenance on local infrastructure, also saving some money if there are some troubleshoot happening, like what happened last week when one of our backhaul tower got hit by the lightning. We don't have to rely on funding support anymore. We have some money that we already saved, so we can replace the devices and then back online again. But of course, this kind of approach can be different in other areas. That is why currently we also trying to expand our project to other place in Cilacap, in certain part of West Java, where we work with local community together with the ICT volunteer in Cilacap region, because here in Ciptagelar, as you probably notice, we are under authorizations of indigenous community who have customary institutions. So like, for example, to build a backhaul tower and everything, It is under it is being navigated and regulated by the customary institutions. But outside of the indigenous community, if we want to make a backhaul tower, for example, we need to check any local regulation and local legal framework to do that. So this is like an iteration and a prototype that we are trying to do to find a different models and various approach on how we can establish local internet infrastructure that are built and utilized by the local community.
Gustav, have you had any experience with TV whitespace in the stuff you've been doing?
Not yet. I think the use of TV whitespace spectrum in Indonesia are still in the early stage. There are some experiments about that, and actually our government regulations and policy allowing people or certain institutions to do such experimentation. But when it comes to scaling up for the mass use, the TV whitespace spectrum are still in the we haven't got any specific policy and regulations that are working in that field. Even though that I think in around 5 years ago, there's some already like some people in the Universitas Indonesia trying to draft regulation on that. And the Ministry of Communication also having a close study on TV whitespace spectrum, but it haven't done being used for the wide level. So I think radio is one of the most common spectrum that are being used for the wireless network. Actually, we also already discussed with some friends at the Institute Technology of Bandung to do some experimentation on the TV whitespace, but I think they haven't any attempt to use that technology for the public yet.
Any other questions or comments from our participants? We've had, well, one very good question by John, but anyone else with some other questions?
May I pitch in?
Yes, Osama.
You know, the one very important question that I was wondering, because here, you are there as a moderator who has been funding and supporting many networks. Gustav is the one who is a practitioner on the ground. Senthil is somebody who has invented, who has, implied, and also private sector. And Ritu has been part of implementation as well as researcher. So I just want to ask one thing, and I'm sure there are many listeners, is that why we are unable to scale up at a large scale various experiments of community networks? Why does it not get adapted? And you can also, Rajneesh, I would be happy to hear if you can also pitch in this one to,
I think that's a good question. I've been so full, so let me try and provide some comments on this. I think fundamentally it goes down to a question of money. Because to build out these networks, money is needed, right? Yes, there are a number of organizations which provide funding, but the funding is not infinite. If you look at the number and amount of people and locations that need to be connected, that is nearly infinite. Okay, it's not infinite, it's roughly half the world, right? Half the global population, or just under half. And what we also see is that a lot of these funding organizations obviously have their own priorities in what is it they want to achieve with the money they have. If we were to connect everyone everywhere, I haven't done the sums. I don't know what that would cost, but definitely I can say we don't have that much money, if we pool all the organizations' money together. Now, when we started off doing this, so I started off this, I've been involved in community networks personally for about 15 odd years, but about 12 years ago, we started this Wireless for Communities program in India, originally, with DEF, of course, with the organization Osama. And the idea was, of course, to try and, it was more an experiment than anything else. Now, back in those days, no one was talking about community networks. Yes, they did exist. Some people were running them in places around the world, but not in the manner we now look at them. And our idea was very simple. Let's just connect the village and see what happens. I mean, there was no, we didn't try and over-engineer things. Neither did we try and go too policy heavy on it. And that experiment worked well. And as I mentioned in the opening, that we've now had over 100, 150 locations that we've either done or inspired across South Asia. So we know the model itself works. Scaling has always been a problem. But it's not just the funding, I think. There's also the capacity within communities to be able to deal with the networks. You can't keep on depending on an external party to come and fix all your problems, right? So it's very critical that we train the local community to do that. Then another component is that it needs to be sustainable, right? There needs to be some sort of revenue stream that is coming in, so that for operations and maintenance costs, but as well to grow the network, right? To replace equipment when time comes. So I think there's multiple parts to the problem. One thing I do fail to see, there's lots of conversations happening around community networks. We seem to talk a lot about funding models and partnerships and things like that. But we don't get to the crux of the issue, is that, why are we not able to scale and amplify the work as quickly as we should be able to? Because I probably answering your question by asking a question in return, but maybe I should stop there. Maybe Gustav, do you have some thoughts on that? On Osama's question?
I kind of agree with you, Raj. Like, but we are very happy. Like in the past couple of years here in Indonesia, there are growing interest on how people can develop and establish their own community networks in their own respective region. Last month, we organized a rural ICT camp in Ciptaglar village, and we have around 600 participants from different parts of Indonesia. And we also invite some colleagues from the government, in particular to the Ministry of Village Developments and the Ministry of Communication. Even in ministerial level, they started to looking at the community network as a particular model that can help them to penetrate the rural connectivity. Because as you probably noticed, that the big telecommunication companies are a bit reluctant to invest such infrastructure in rural areas and remote places. And community networks models is one of the options that are somehow already there on their table. And in our government level, there is also a different model how they can do that. And as is already mentioned by Ritu, for example, it is also needed a business model and a revenue stream to make the local connectivity work and sustain. And of course, like you also mentioned, there are some technicality aspects that are strongly embedded to it. So knowledge transfer, trainings, workshop is very essential to do that, because I think now we are also trying to set up new models because we already work the indigenous community, and here in Indonesia we have a different group of community who have a different background and different situations. So there are no particular one model for all. We have to test out different models, because I think in terms of technology, the option is already there, but how it's operate in social level, it needs a certain social engineering process, and sometimes it can take quite long process. But we are very lucky. We are being located in the right ecosystem. There are a lot of friends who are helping us in setting up community network project here in Indonesia, together with the ICT Watch and other friends from the ICT volunteer. And I think this growing interest also needed to be channeling, needed to be support. So now our government also trying to make some kind of prototypes, because as you mentioned earlier, during the COVID-19 pandemic situation, the internet connectivity and digital platform is one of the way how we can keep things keep on running. And now I think there's some increasing interest and necessity, and then yeah, we need to show many different models that are can be applied and developed by different community.
So, okay, we're at the end of the session. Gustav, if I were to say to you to tweet your closing comment, so that means 280 characters, what would it be? What's your last comment for this session?
Referring to our to my conversation with Ono Purbo, one of the internet, the father of internet in Indonesia, in order to scaling up the community network or the internet of people, actually there are three ways: power, money, and masses. Actually, we need to make smart people, because power and money is not belong to the masses. We need to encourage movements. We need to encourage people. We need to make people more smart, so they can initiate their own community network and fulfilling their needs to have internet connectivity. So that is what we are trying to work right now, that how we can scale up our initiative by working with as much as people who have same passion and same interest. And we work with knowledge, we work with channeling information. We need to scale up the skill. So the interest in growing the community network can somehow well develop in the future.